Sam Neill faced down dinosaurs without blinking. So why did this soft-spoken man from New Zealand once say the scariest thing he ever did wasn't standing in front of a T-Rex? It was opening up his heart to one woman, twice, and surviving both endings. Stick with me, because this story isn't really about Hollywood. It's about what a famous man decides actually matters once the cameras stop rolling. When the news broke that Sam Neill had died at 78, tributes flooded in from every corner of the film world. People remembered the actor who calmly outran raptors, who brought warmth and intelligence to every character he played, and who spent more than 50 years becoming one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. But if you actually listen to what Sam said in interviews over the years, especially toward the end, you'd notice something interesting. He barely talked about awards, he barely talked about box office numbers, he talked about home, he talked about his kids, and more than almost anything else, he talked about the people who shaped who he actually was, off camera, away from the lights. One of those people was a woman named Noriko Watanabe. Their story together wasn't some tabloid fairy tale. It was messy in places, quiet in others, and it eventually came to an end. But here's the thing. Sam never spoke about it like a failure. He spoke about nearly 3 decades with her, like it was one of the great privileges of his life. This is the story of that relationship, how it shaped the man behind Dr. Alan Grant, and why, even after everything, Sam Neill looked back with gratitude instead of regret. Let's start at the beginning, because Sam's path to stardom was anything but obvious. He was born in 1947 in Omagh, a small town in Northern Ireland. When he was still a young kid, his family packed up and moved all the way to New Zealand, and that country became the place he'd call home for the rest of his life. His father had served in the military, and all those early moves meant young Sam grew up a little reserved, a little watchful. He wasn't the class clown. He was the kid with his nose in a book, quietly soaking up stories and history, and that thoughtful streak never really left him. Here's something people don't always know. Sam didn't grow up dreaming of being a movie star. He actually went to university to study English literature. He was fascinated by storytelling long before he ever thought about standing in front of a camera. Acting sort of found him, rather than the other way around. And maybe that's exactly why people who worked with him kept using the same words to describe him. Humble, sharp, and completely free of the ego you'd expect from someone this famous. Even once he'd made it, once the world knew his face, Sam never really warmed up to the glitzy side of the business. While a lot of actors were out chasing premieres and photographers, Sam was happiest wearing mud-caked boots on his farm in New Zealand. He had a vineyard. He had animals. And yes, he famously named them after his celebrity friends, which led to some pretty funny stories over the years. He once joked that Meryl Streep, his hen, met an unfortunate end care of a ferret. That's just who he was. Muddy boots over black tie, every single time. That desire for a simple, grounded life tells you a lot about what Sam actually valued. He wanted conversation over attention. He wanted loyalty over excitement. He wanted family over fame. And eventually, those priorities led him straight to the relationship that would define so much of his adult life. Now, Sam's rise in the industry didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it didn't really stop. His breakout came in the late 1970s, with a film called My Brilliant Career, which put him on the map internationally. Through the 80s, he kept choosing thoughtful, interesting projects. Films like The Hunt for Red October and Dead Calm built his reputation as a serious actor with real range. But it was 1993 that changed absolutely everything. He was cast as Dr. Alan Grant in a little movie called Jurassic Park, and within months, this guy who'd once been shy about the camera became one of the most recognizable faces on Earth. With that fame came everything you'd expect. Global premieres, months-long shoots on the other side of the world, a level of attention most of us can't fully imagine. And yet, whenever an interviewer steered the conversation away from movies and toward his actual life, something shifted in Sam. He'd light up talking about heading home to New Zealand, about his kids, about the vineyard. Professional success was satisfying, sure, but it was never where his happiness actually lived. That foundation had already been built with someone else entirely. So let's talk about how he met Noriko. It was 1989, and Sam was working on the set of Dead Calm, the same film, funnily enough, where he starred opposite a young Nicole Kidman. Noriko Watanabe was part of the crew, working as a makeup artist. She wasn't chasing the spotlight, she was doing skilled, behind-the-scenes work that most audiences never think twice about. But something clicked between them almost immediately. Sam, who'd just come out of a previous long relationship, was drawn to her, and by his own admission, he pursued her pretty relentlessly during the shoot. Lots of downtime on location, and he apparently spent most of it trying to win her over. It worked. The two married in September of 1989, and what followed was nearly 3 decades together. They welcomed a daughter, Elena, and Sam also adopted Noriko's daughter from an earlier relationship, a girl named Maiko, raising her as his own. Together they built a genuinely blended, genuinely private family, one that stayed remarkably out of the tabloids despite Sam's growing fame. Because Noriko had worked in the film industry herself, she understood something a lot of partners never quite grasp: the brutal unpredictability of an actor's schedule, the months away, the emotional toll of big productions. That understanding gave their relationship a kind of patience that's hard to fake. And whenever Sam talked about home in interviews over the years, he wasn't talking about a mansion or a lifestyle. He was talking about vineyards, family dinners, long conversations, the quiet stuff. But, and this is important, even the most solid-looking marriages face pressure that outsiders never see. As Sam's career kept climbing after Jurassic Park, the demands of international filmmaking pulled him further and further from home for longer stretches. He was living 2 lives at once, one full of cameras and airports, and one that was just quiet, rolling hills, family dinners, and eventually, after almost 28 years together, Sam and Noriko separated in 2017. Here's what's worth noticing though. There was no messy public fallout, no bitter headlines, no finger-pointing in the press. They handled the end of their marriage the same way they'd handled being together, quietly, and with a surprising amount of grace. And what really stood out in the years that followed was how Sam chose to talk about it. He never leaned into blame. Instead, he'd say things like, "Relationships evolve, people grow in different directions, and love doesn't always look like staying together forever." He seemed to genuinely believe that gratitude and sadness could exist in the same breath. In his memoir, which he was promoting not long before his passing, Sam reflected honestly on the different chapters of his life, including his first relationship with actress Lisa Harrow, with whom he had a son, and his years with Noriko. He didn't pretend everything had been perfect. He openly admitted that a career like his came with real costs, time missed with family, sacrifices that don't show up in a highlight reel. But even with all that honesty, family stayed at the absolute center of how he talked about his life. He spoke warmly, consistently, about his children, Elena, Maiko, and his son from his earlier relationship, right up until the end. And that's really the heart of this story, isn't it? Not every meaningful love story ends with 2 people growing old together under the same roof. Sometimes its biggest legacy is simply the family it created and the years of memories that don't just disappear the moment things change. Sam seemed to understand that better than most people ever do. In his later years, he wasn't dwelling on what didn't work out. He was genuinely grateful for what did. Now let's talk about the chapter that made his final years so much harder, and honestly, so much more human. In 2023, Sam went public with a rare and aggressive form of blood cancer. It's the kind of news that would knock most people flat, but true to form, Sam faced it with dry humor and total honesty. He didn't disappear from public life, he kept writing, he kept working when his body allowed it, and he kept telling people, in his own understated way, that once you're staring down something like this, you stop caring about ambition and start caring about time. Then, in April of 2026, Sam shared something that felt like a genuine gift to everyone following his story. After taking part in a clinical trial in Australia, he announced he was cancer-free. He sounded, by all accounts, thrilled and relieved. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, more time with his kids, more time on the land he loved so much. But life doesn't always give us the ending we're hoping for. On July 13, 2026, Sam Neill passed away suddenly in Sydney, Australia, surrounded by his family. His family's statement made a point of noting that his death, while sudden and unexpected, came while he was cancer-free, that the disease he'd fought so hard against didn't ultimately take him. He passed, as his loved ones put it, with the same dignity that had defined his entire life. Tributes came pouring in almost instantly, from people like Laura Dern, who called him a beloved lifetime friend, to fellow New Zealander Carl Urban, who described him as a true national treasure. But underneath all the professional praise, the story that kept surfacing again and again was the same one Sam himself had been telling for years, that his greatest role was never on a screen. It was being a father, a partner, a friend, a guy in muddy boots who'd rather talk about his vineyard than his box office numbers. When we remember Sam Neill, sure, we'll picture the fearless paleontologist standing in front of towering dinosaurs. We'll picture the quiet dignity he brought to every role across 5 decades of work. But for the people who actually knew him, that was never the whole story. His real legacy is in the family he built with Noriko Watanabe, the children he raised, and the quiet, grounded life he chose over the noise of Hollywood, again and again, for his entire career. Their marriage didn't last forever, but Sam never treated that as the measure of whether it mattered. It gave him nearly 30 years, 2 daughters he adored, a lifetime of memories, and a foundation that shaped the man millions of people came to love on screen. That's the real lesson buried in this whole story. Love doesn't have to last a lifetime to leave a lifetime's worth of meaning behind. So if this story moved you even a little, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment about which Sam Neill role meant the most to you, and subscribe if you want more honest, heartfelt stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.